There was probably a specific summer you remember as endless. Long days that felt like they'd never run out. You weren't watching the clock. You weren't counting the weeks. Time just stretched. You're never getting that back. Not because you're older. Not because life got harder. But because of something that happened inside your brain that nobody ever told you about. Something that started the moment you were born and has been running ever since. Here's what's strange. Time didn't actually speed up. Every day you've ever lived has contained exactly 86,400 seconds. The clock on the wall runs at the same speed it always did. Nothing about time itself has changed. What changed is the machine you use to measure it. And that machine has been quietly recalibrating itself your entire life, in a way that only moves in one direction. Let's start with a number that should bother you more than it does. When you were 10 years old, 1 year represented 10% of everything you had ever experienced. Every single memory, every sensation, every moment of consciousness you had ever accumulated, 1 year was a full tenth of all of it. That's why it felt enormous. It was enormous, relative to everything you had to compare it to. Right now, if you're in your 30s, 1 year is roughly 3% of your life. If you're in your 40s, it's closer to 2. The year itself hasn't shrunk. Your context for it has exploded. And your brain, which measures time not by the clock but by how much new experience surrounds it, registers that year as correspondingly smaller. This is called the proportionality theory of time perception. And it was first described by philosopher Paul Janet in 1877. He noticed what every human being eventually notices, that life seems to accelerate with age. And he was the first to put a mathematical framework around why. But proportionality is only the first layer. The deeper answer lives in your memory. And to understand it, you need to understand something about how your brain actually builds a sense of time passing. Your brain doesn't have a clock. Not a real one. It doesn't tick. It doesn't count seconds. What it does instead is use memory density, the number of distinct, novel experiences stored in a given period, to construct a feeling of how long that period lasted. More new memories packed into a stretch of time, and your brain registers that stretch as long. Fewer new memories, and it collapses. Think about the last truly new thing you experienced. A place you'd never been. A skill you were learning from scratch. A period of your life when everything was unfamiliar and you were paying attention to all of it. Those periods feel long in memory even if they weren't long on the calendar. A 2-week trip somewhere new can feel, in retrospect, like it lasted a month. Because your brain was filing new information constantly. Every detail was worth storing. Now think about last Tuesday. Most adults live in a world that has become almost entirely predictable. You wake up in the same place, take the same route, eat the same things, speak to the same people, run the same patterns. Your brain, which is an efficiency machine above all else, stops filing most of it. There's no point. It's not new. It's not surprising. It already knows what happens next. And when there's nothing new to store, the weeks blur. The months collapse into each other. And December arrives before you've finished processing March. This is what psychologists call the routinization effect. And it is the single biggest reason adult life feels like it's moving at twice the speed of childhood. When you were a child, everything was new. A new grade, a changing body, unfamiliar social rules. Your brain filed constantly, building a dense archive of novel experiences. That's why childhood feels enormous when you look back. It wasn't actually longer, it just contained more. But as life becomes routine, time perception compresses, and it physically rewrites your past. In 1890, psychologist William James called this the emptying out of adult memory. Routine makes the past feel thinner, less inhabited, because neurologically, you weren't fully present. Your hippocampus, the region that stores memories, prioritizes novelty. New environments get encoded in high detail. Familiar, repetitive experiences get skipped. If you spend years on autopilot, your brain simply decides your daily life isn't worth storing. This creates a strange recursion. The more comfortable and efficient your life becomes, the faster it moves, and the less you actually retain. There's also an emotional layer. Emotionally significant events activate your amygdala, which flags them as important, prompting your hippocampus to encode them in massive detail. That's why a first heartbreak or a wedding week feels like it lasted a season. Childhood is packed with emotional firsts. Everything lands with full force because nothing has context yet. As an adult, you've felt grief, joy, and failure before. Less shock means thinner encoding, and a life that feels like it blurred past while you weren't looking. The feeling of time accelerating isn't happening to you. It's a mechanism of your brain, acting in direct proportion to how little you ask it to pay attention. The year isn't shorter. Your archive is. While you can't reverse the math of getting older, the thinning archive isn't inevitable. It's the product of trading novelty for comfort. Every time you do something genuinely new, or learn something uncomfortable, your brain slows down. Measurably. That period will feel longer in retrospect. Those endless summers weren't endless because you were young. They were endless because you were paying attention. The clock hasn't changed, but the archive has, and you are the one who builds it. Whether you do anything about it is a different question entirely.